Men, and I use the term loosely. Hey, it's dark 30 in the morning, and I'm fixing to pull the lifters, the push rods, and the cam out of this motor. I'm going to skip the disassembly because it's routine and kind of boring, and I'll be back with you when I've got the parts to show you, and you'll understand why. Okay, I'm back at you. Everything came apart smoothly. The only little problem was right here. This lump on the cylinder casting interfered with the back side of the lifter block. I'm probably going to do a little grinding on this so that it'll come in and out of there more easily. It came out, but I mean it had to be exactly the right wiggle configuration to get it out of there. Everything in there looks good. No chunks of metal laying at the bottom, no extra parts floating around in there. Everything looks good. So let's go take a look at the push rods and the lifters. So when I bought this bike, this is the lifter push rod arrangement that was in it. This is a Jim's lifter. It was a hydraulic lifter. The set of 4 of these probably cost over 400 bucks, I bet. It's a quality product, no doubt about it. But for whatever reason, and I don't know why, they decided to convert it to solid lifters. So they took the hydraulics out of the lifter body, and I don't know, they're gone. Who knows what happened to them? And they replaced the hydraulics with this solid chunk of metal, which just sits in there. So functionally, it seems like it should work just fine. Although I found this to kind of wobble in there, and it made adjusting the push rods even more difficult than something that turned out to be pretty difficult in the first place. Why do I say it was difficult to adjust the push rods? Well, this is the push rod, or one of the push rods that was in it. And basically, you had to put a wrench over here. You had to put a wrench over here. Oops, that'd be the 1/2-inch wrench. You had to put a wrench over here. And then you may or may not, you might be able to do it with your fingers, but then you would need a wrench to turn the adjustment to get it where you wanted it. And then after you got the adjustment where you wanted it, you had to hold on to the push rod and the adjuster, and then you had to tighten this nut. Well, fuck me, try doing that on a motorcycle. A giant pain in the balls, let me tell you. So early on, well, after I did this the first time, I said to myself, this shit has got to go. So this push rod, these lifters, this is history. This is what I'm going with now. This is a knucklehead lifter and a knucklehead push rod. Knuckleheads came with solid lifters, so this essentially is the stock setup on a knucklehead. You don't have to hold the base of the lifter when you're doing your adjustment because the slots in the tappet block will keep it from rotating. So you just have the conventional adjustment like you would on a Sportster. And of course, since panheads had hydraulic lifters from the get-go, there's no instructions in the manual on how to do this. But I'm going to do it the same way I do Sportsters. I'm going to tighten it up and then back it off until the rod spins freely with just noticeable side shake. So maintenance-wise, this is going to be a tremendous improvement. I have many concerns about this, and one of the concerns is how long this stacked up collection of parts gets to be. This stacked up collection of parts, the originals, barely fit in there. I kind of had to force the push rod into this little socket over here. It just I couldn't make it short enough. But this arrangement looks to be a little shorter, so I think it's going to fit in there just fine. So that's the lifters. That's why we're changing them. And on this particular motor, bear in mind, panheads were originally hydraulic lifters. They were converted to solids. A lot of oil lines on this engine have been replumbed, and indeed there's been some passageways drilled, some passageways blocked off. I don't even know if I could put this thing back to hydraulic lifters if I wanted to, and I'm not going to try. I'm good with I'm good with solid lifters. So let's talk about camshafts and why I'm changing this one. This bike ran okay. It did not have the torque that I thought it should have. It just wasn't quite right. The compression was also low. Both cylinders were measured out to 85, which is low. And when I put this cam in, I knew nothing about it. It's got some numbers on the end. 414 and DW. I don't know who makes it. There's no maker mark on it. And if you look at this, it's obviously a very long duration cam. And long duration cams are bad for compression. The exhaust valve stays open longer, so the intake doesn't really start drawing air in as soon as it would on a short duration cam. And the worst part of the problem is the intake valve closes much later. It closes as the piston is on its way up. So the piston goes up farther on a longer duration cam and delays the intake valve closing. And of course that's what blocks off the air that's in the combustion chamber. So a valve that closes later is going to develop less compression than a valve that closes earlier. So I had a feeling, although I didn't know for sure, that I wanted a shorter duration cam. So I got on the phone with S&S and I was talking to their tech guys over there, and those guys have always been very helpful. And they recommended this cam, and I forget what it was. Hey, here it is. Here's the part number of it. They recommended this cam for solid lifter panheads with low compression pistons. And as soon as I took this cam out and looked at these lobes, I had already looked at these lobes. But as soon as I took this cam out of the engine and looked at how long these lobes are, and I knew, I had looked at this one previously, so I knew this was pretty short. I'm sure this is going to give this engine a lot more power. Lift-wise, this one is 5/1000 of an inch less than this one, so that much of it is pretty much the same. But intuition a lot of times on a motor is rarely correct. I mean, a guy says, oh, I ought to put a cam in there, I want lots of lift, I want lots of duration. The likelihood is, for most street motors, you probably don't. A lot of times with cams and carburetors, less is more. And of course, I'm not going to know until I get this thing out and drive it. But we're going to put this one in. Looking at the profiles of these lobes, I think I'm going to be much happier with this one. The cam is installed, and I'll tell you what, I could get used to working on big twins. Harley's got that one-eyed drunk guy that does the timing marks on Sportsters, and you never know where they're at for sure, but these are nice. Well, of course, S&S did this gear, but you got a dot on a tooth that points to the line in the valley on the mating tooth. You got another dot on a tooth that points to a line in the valley on its mating tooth. And then down in here, this is Harley, you got a line in a valley that points to the line on the tooth. So this is the oil pump breather. None of that business with timing marker in the window and the dot in the slot like on a Sportster. Much easier, much more straightforward. The distributor drives off of this gear here. This gear was never unmated from the pinion gear, so the distributor was never unmated from its drive gear, so the timing didn't change. I don't even have to reset the timing. And on a Sportster, of course, if you had a vertical mag or the cone motor with points on it, you'd be redoing the points and the timing, all that stuff. So this is good to go. I did have a snafu here. Let me show you this snafu. This is the cam bushing, and the S&S gear was a little tight in this bushing, and I ended up honing it, okay? And when I put it all together, there was like no free play on the cam. So I ended up taking this bushing out, putting it on the lathe, cutting 20 thou off of the thrust surface of this bushing. I've got good end play on the cam, everything spins freely. I'm really looking forward to getting this motor fired up. I've really got a feeling this cam is going to make this motor run a lot better with a lot more low end torque, which is what I want. But anyway, ready to put the gasket on it and button it up. Okay, valve adjustment. Pretty much the same on Harleys. Now that I only have 2 nuts to deal with, it's a lot easier. But anyway, here's the basic procedure. I reach my hand around, I got a wrench on the end of the sprocket shaft, crank the engine over until the intake valve closes. When the intake valve closes, I know the piston is on its way up. I stick a little skinny screwdriver in the spark plug hole, this one, and I feel for the piston to come up. Piston's at top dead center. On compression, I could adjust both valves on whichever cylinder that is. So now that I got rid of those jackass tubes with the 3 nuts, all I got to do is hold the lock nut on the bottom and crank the adjuster nut up. Might be able to do it with my fingers. Or maybe not. And everything in there is black, so it's probably hard to see. Okay, the nut now is starting to get tight. So I know I'm putting tension on the valve, and I can't spin the pushrod tube. So I'm going to hold the adjuster, crank the lock nut down, snug it but not make it real tight. Pushrod barely turns. So I'm going to give it maybe a flat. Okay, pushrod spins freely, just notable side shake. Let's put a little torque on the lock nut. That one is good to go. We'll do the exhaust the same way. Repeat for the rear. I will crank the engine over one more time to double check these adjustments before I, expand the tubes and put the clips in. And that's all there is to it. People make a big deal about adjusting valves. The hardest part of adjusting valves is being able to rotate the engine somehow or another. And that's why I love engines with open primaries like this, because you just put a wrench on the end of the shaft and you're good to go. Makes it very easy. Anyway, that's all there is to it. just an FYI, as long as we're looking at this side of the motor. This is the feed line, oil feed line, to the heads that provides pressure oil to the rocker arms. This is not copper. This is copper plated steel brake line. Copper is a soft material and it easily and quickly work hardens and would be likely to break. So these are steel brake lines and they've all been double flared. I've seen guys use copper lines and it looks cool for a little while, but probably not really the material you want to be using on something that vibrates as much as a Harley. I don't use it. If you like the look, these copper coated, copper plated brake lines look pretty sharp. And if you're going to do any amount of this kind of work, spend the money, buy the double flaring tool. It gives you a much stronger connection at all the flares. And I think I'm out of here. Please subscribe, get yourself a coffee cup, a sticker, join up at Patreon. I got to bolt the air cleaner back on and hook the brake master cylinder back up, and this project is done. I am really looking forward to throwing a leg over this and kick-starting it. I have high hopes this thing is going to run a lot better with that new cam in there. And you know what? I think I'm also going to give away the old cam, the old lifters, and the push rods. There's nothing wrong with those parts. They're all perfectly usable, but not suitable for this motor. I think you'd have something. I think you'd have to have something that you'd want to hot rod a little more to take advantage of that cam. That cam is a very long duration cam. This thing, I'm not going to be hot rodding on this at all. This is for taking it easy, this bike. Anyway, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Take care. See you next time. I am out of here.